What's up, my friend? Welcome to the Finding Direction podcast. My name is Stu Massengill, and I'm here every single week to bring you a passionate guest or message dedicated to helping you find your purpose so that you can live a life full of passion, fulfillment, and happiness. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for hanging out with me, and let's dive in. What's up, my friend? Welcome back to the Finding Direction podcast. I am so freaking excited for you to dive into this week's episode. I am sitting down with a woman named Jenn Lim, and she, in this episode, has put out so much wisdom. She's articulated it unbelievably in a beautiful manner. I am going to have to say that of all the episodes I've done, we've done over 350 episodes. This is one of my favorite that we've done on the entire podcast. So you are going to enjoy this. Jenn Lim, to give you a little bit of her background, she is the founder and best-selling author of Beyond Happiness and the CEO of a company called Delivering Happiness, a company she and Tony Hsieh, the late CEO of Zappos.com, co-founded. And in 2017, she was elected to be on the Global Happiness Council of Work and Wellbeing. And in 2020, Delivering Happiness was placed on the Inc. 5000 list, becoming one of the fastest growing private companies in the U.S. She's been featured in Forbes, Entrepreneur, the World Happiness Report, the New York Post, and on and on and on. And she's an international speaker as well, speaking for companies like Facebook, Indeed, PayPal, just to name a few. And on this episode, some of the things you can expect us to go into is the deeper conversation that we should be having around happiness in our lives, in the workplace, how to uncover your values and your purpose, why the lows in life are holding a powerful lesson that you have to begin to investigate. These are some of the things you can expect. You are going to get so much value, so much wisdom. I am so excited for you to dive into this episode. If you have not yet, make sure you hit the subscribe button so you can join us every single week as we bring you conversations and insights to help you live a life full of passion, fulfillment, and happiness. And without further ado, here we go, my friend. Jenn Lim, thank you so much for being here, and thank you for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be here, Stu.
Absolutely. And so as we dive in, I would love it if you could give our listener sort of an inside look to your journey as you've sort of navigated through life. I know there's been a lot of things you've done, but if you could sort of give us, the high level overview of your journey, we'd love to dive in starting there.
Sure. Gosh, where to start? But I think, just rewinding real quick to school, because I'm Asian American, so in that household, you had to get to good school, become a doctor, lawyer, and, learn a variety of musical instruments. Yeah. So I was following that path. Got into Cal, was studying pre-med, and just realized it wasn't for me. And so I switched gears, majored in Asian American studies, and, freaked out my parents. They said, come home more often. We'll tell you what your Asian American studies life is about. Yeah. But did it anyway. Then I freaked out because I couldn't find a job for a while. But luckily the .com was born, and I became a .com baby. Got a job at KPMG, was an internet strategist, and it seemed like, wow, life is easy. The money, title, status just came pretty like almost overnight. And then we all know the end of that story. .com busted, and I lost it all. So that was, getting laid off was one thing, but then within a series, pretty much within a year, that happened, 9/11 happened, and then my dad was diagnosed with stage 3 colon cancer, and he died shortly thereafter. So that was, a big turning point for me. I was realizing I was chasing all the wrong things, money, title, status, when it didn't mean that much in the end. So I totally pivoted, and I didn't call it back then. I didn't call it values. I didn't call it purpose. I was just like, I'm not making the right decisions based on anything. I didn't have any sort of foundation as to what I want to live my life by. So that was a pivot point for me. And I started independent consulting at that time because I didn't want to work for anyone anymore. But yeah, that's how I got into pretty much my trajectory into where I'm at today.
Yeah. So when you went through those chain of events, because I mean, one thing that sticks out to me is you go from Asian American studies to all of a sudden working in the .com. I mean, that's a pretty, at least I don't see the connection. Maybe I'm missing it. But it seems like it was, well, I guess let me ask you, how did you go from Asian American studies to all of a sudden you're working in the .com?
Yeah, I mean, no one could see the connection, so you're not the only one. But it was a product of the time because, the internet was booming, so people were just needing people to fill seats. And back then, back in the day, I was actually using a telephone and literally cold calling anyone that would pick up. And luckily for me, there was a senior manager at KPMG, because of my background, they're like, what is Asian American Studies? So she just really needed someone. She's like, when can you start? And that was the ticket that I needed, like the golden ticket. Yeah.
Okay.
I wish I remembered her name because I want to say thanks.
Yeah. And a testament to your resourcefulness, right? Of sort of doing what it takes to find a way. And so and then if we jump forward to, this year of your life where in a series of a year, 3 crazy things happen, right? That require you to go like deep within yourself. And one of the things I loved in studying your life and your work is that you're a huge fan of deep conversations, which I love deep conversations. And I'm curious, when you went through that, like what were some of the deep conversations that you were having with yourself that led you to this next trajectory? Because it's whatever the deep conversations you had in that moment, for now, the last few decades has created an unbelievable life. And it's been meaningful and purpose-filled and filled with happiness and all these things. So what were some of those deep conversations Jenn had with Jenn in those moments?
I love how you're phrasing it. I've never been asked that. Because I love deep diving, and here we are, Stu. We're deep diving right now. Let's do it. After the dad, I realized, that one of my greatest fears growing up was losing a parent, and that came earlier than I thought it would. So coming face to face with that and trying to rationalize it to myself that I'll be okay. Others have survived this. I will too. So that's, I think, where I got set on to these deeper conversations within myself of, what can I do now so that I don't look back with regret? And that was one of the things. Like, luckily, I actually had an opportunity to go travel international with KPMG, and like it was a dream role. And I didn't even know how much time my dad had left, and I decided not to go. Because one of the deep conversations I had is like, if I don't want to live with regret, I want to prioritize the people in my life. And that, decision I never regretted. So I asked myself, what are the things that I should just base my decisions on, big or small, so that I don't look back with regret. So that's when I started, again, not naming them as values back then, but just like, number one, people in my life. And then as I kind of ruminated on it, then I realized another big thing was freedom to make my own choices. Getting laid off sucked because, I worked my ass off, and I was like, dude, does this person even care? Or this company even care? And the third thing is authenticity. That was the third thing I really wanting to be more true to, because showing up, no offense to KPMG, but wearing the khakis, wearing the collared shirt, I was just like, this isn't really me, is it? So that's kind of what set that course from those conversations with Jenn.
And the question you asked yourself was, if I don't want to have any regrets, what are the things that are most important to me?
Right. Another way I put it is that, like I overthought everything in my life, like, especially around that time.
Yeah, been there.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I'm still a recovering perfectionist. I don't know about you, but it's just too much. So yeah, so I wanted to simplify that process as much as I could. And when I was able to establish those pillars or values that, if you want to call that, then I could ask any question, put it up to those values, and the answer, even if it wasn't easy, at least it was more simple in my head.
Yeah.
Like, that's the right thing to do, even if it's going to go bad, which sometimes it did.
Yeah.
The failure stuff sucks, but at least it was worth it,
Yeah. So the question then I'm going to take a shot that maybe popped in your head as you went through that is, what's next? Right? This has all happened. I'm in this phase of not knowing what the heck is going on in my life. What's next? And the way you filtered that would be through, okay, the people around me is important, having freedom, and then also being authentic to myself. And that's what allowed you to take this next step, which was consulting, correct?
Yeah. So becoming my own independent consultant, in some ways, I think people call it entrepreneurs. And back then it wasn't. It was just like, gotta do something. So, it's really interesting too, as you're asking these questions. It's such almost like a mirror of what happened in the last few years for a lot of people I know, because they got laid off, or, they lost someone they loved, or they lost, some hope of what was going to happen. So it was pretty trippy to see that in a new cycle, but very reminiscent of those events. So yeah, I ended up just working on my own, consulting with different companies, clients, and then stumbled upon one called Zappos back in the day. It was a startup. And joined as a consultant. A friend met Tony, the late CEO of Zappos back then in '99, and started consulting there. And kind of like, it's kind of one of those companies, like, when you're in school and you have like a best friend's like little sibling, brother or sister, and they're like, oh, they're so cute. And then all of a sudden they grow up and you're like, what? How did you get so big? And that was Zappos. It was just, it felt like a little playground of how to be profitable and actually care about your people. So it was an amazing experience after having experience of what I didn't want in a workplace.
And so what were some of the things that you were consulting on in your early days? Like when you said, I'm going to be a consultant, how did you come to the idea of, okay, I'm going to consult on this or that? Like, and then what did you ultimately consult on when you started?
Yeah, I mean, towards the beginning, it was anything that people needed. And it was a joke. Because, like, that was the question that you asked, like, how do you go from Asian American Studies to internet strategist? And the joke was, you just got to keep a page ahead of the client in the book that's being written. And so I felt like a total poser, right? Yeah. And entitled, because, who was I to do this? But it was just really learning and just trying to absorb and keep on top of it. So yeah, at the beginning, it was just, you went from internet to marketing, and then eventually into people and culture. That's kind of where, when Zappos landed with what they wanted to do, with, focus on customers through their people, make their employees happy first, and then customers are they happier, and then you'll actually be more profitable, that kind of thing. So yeah, that's where I ended up on the people space.
Yeah. And a beautiful way to look at, I know in my own life, I've been guilty of this where you're, well, if I'm going to do something, I need to know the next 10 pages, not even the next 10 pages. I need to know the next 10 chapters, not even the next chapters. I need to know the next 10 novels, and sometimes for myself, I can get caught up, and I'm guessing maybe our listener, and I think people in general can get caught up in, I need to know the next 10, 20, 50 things. And I love that the way that you frame it up is just, you just need to be one page ahead, right? And if you can be one page ahead, it's easier to take that first step. And I'm sure the picture that pops into my mind is like the duck when you're sitting on water and you're super calm on the top. Yeah, you know, we're going to do this, Zappos. And on the bottom, your feet are like scrambling and you're like, oh my God, oh my God.
Totally. It's funny you say that because just the other day I had a conversation with someone and she brought up the swan reference, but very similar. Of like, oh, the swan looks so elegant and calm. And then now, like, no, it's like paddling ferociously. But yeah, it was totally that. And I think you're also bringing up something or touching upon something that's really important too about the fact that a lot of the things that I did do project-wise I didn't like, you know, whether it's the content or the people or the team. So that was super helpful for me going through, you know, a page at a time, a day at a time to understand, hey, this is not where I want to go. So when the opportunity came to focus more around culture, more around people, I was like, hey, this is actually more like going back to the values, I never thought about this actually. But like prioritizing people, I didn't realize that was going to happen in the workplace too.
Yeah. Interesting. So it's like going one page at a time allowed you to flow where you wanted to go because you didn't have 10 pages written. So you didn't have to commit to X, Y, Z. You were able to sort of navigate it and figure it out as you went, really.
Yeah, exactly. And what made it less daunting and, you know, less scary. Yeah. Was because I had those values. Like at least I have these things that I know I can ground myself with. And then it made the unknown a little less uncertain.
Yeah, I was going to ask that. Like, how did you mentally cope with like almost being in like a scramble a lot of the time, right? Because you're figuring it out, I mean, daily. So one, it seems like way that you would sort of cope, if that's the right terminology, with that sort of, you know, your mind in those moments was one, go into your values. And was there anything else you would do to like mentally just like get yourself in a place where you kept moving forward and on the top you were looking elegant like a swan?
Oh, wow. Like I just, you know, reflecting back that time, I'm sure there were a lot of those moments like were freak out moments, you know, like just what the freak am I doing? Yeah. It's just scary because a lot of people went to a full-time job, found something very, something that they can depend on. And I didn't. And that every day was scary. Yeah. So I think I was looking towards like, what are some, I don't call them mentors. I think we learn from everyone, but certain examples of people out there that have done it kind of gave me a sense of, you know, at least a little bit of more sanity that this can be done. Yeah. So I think it's a daily reminder of that. But yeah, I think one of the things too is just to expect the freaks, you know, expect the freak out and freaks, but you know, expect those times and just try to be. I try to just calm myself and just like saying, you know, you're on the right path, but it's not easy at certain times when you're like not getting paid.
Yeah. And I like it too, where it's like when the freak out happens or something, if you're anticipating it, you go, okay, this is just one of those moments that I know was going to come where I'm scrambling, but that's part of the process. So if we keep going through your story, like at what point does this idea in this just like mission and this really just idea of happiness come into your life? Like happiness is something that you've spread through the world. You've spread it into companies. You've done it extraordinarily well. You've written books on it. You and Tony Hsieh founded the company on it. I mean, happiness has been a very focal point of your life and the work that you do. So at what point did that light bulb click on for you and go, wow, I'm going to really go deep in this happiness thing?
Yeah. So, I mean, the ironic thing is that I was not the happy-go-lucky person by any means growing up. I was super cynical, always thinking about the other angles. And so what, I was really was reading existential books, you know, like the why am I here question, reading, anyways, fast forward to that moment when here I'm asking all these deep questions and we stumbled, Tony and I started geeking out on something called positive psychology and the science of happiness. Didn't know it existed. Didn't know there was actually data and studies and, basically the science to things that we commonly ask ourselves. So that was a huge epiphany. So we geeked out on books like Happiness Hypothesis by Jonathan Haidt, Marty Seligman, he's the godfather of positive psychology. And it was really cool and academic, though. And so that was when we were like, well, why can't we make this more practical?
Yeah.
And Zappos became that playground or petri dish that we were able to just try, crazy, funky things, but based on the science and how you can actually change happiness or apply happiness from that academic side to a more practical side, but at work. So that's kind of how it all came around.
Yeah. And what would you say is the deeper conversation that we should be having about happiness, either in the workplace, but also with ourselves?
Yeah, I love how you like to go deep, Stu.
I do. It's fun. It's just, I don't know. It's just an interesting world when you go deep. It's fun. I like that you like it.
Yeah, totally. It's like click down now.
Yeah.
Click again.
Yeah.
I think the biggest, because happiness is so universal. Everyone has it in their culture, in life.
Right.
Yet it's so subjective. So I think the deeper question is, what does it actually mean to you? And that sounds so simple, but that's why I think we're so into the science of it, because based on that, there's data that shows there are ways to increase your own happiness levels, and that's having a sense of autonomy, having a sense of progress, that you're growing some way, developing in some way, learning. The third one is having connectedness, like meaningful connections. And the last and the most sustainable form of happiness, whether you're looking at Aristotle or Socrates or fast forward to the latest science, is having that sense of purpose, being a part of something that's bigger than yourself. So those, just those kind of like, yeah, that makes sense. But then the most important deep question, I think, is like, how does that apply to me?
Right.
And finding that purpose is part of the journey. It's not like epiphany. Usually it's really going through the trial and error of what you don't like and realizing that purpose evolves as you evolve. Purpose evolves as the world did in the last few years, especially. So I think that's the deeper side of what happiness is.
Yeah. Beautiful. And then the four pillars were autonomy, so sense of freedom, right? Where you can kind of do the things that you want. The second was progress.
So learning, developing, growing.
Right. And
in some way.
Okay. And that you're connected with people and that you're connected also to a sense of purpose, which ties to something greater than yourself. Okay. Yeah. So
being part of something bigger than yourself.
So if we look at purpose and that's our surface, what are like three questions underneath purpose that someone could ask themselves to really go inward, reflect, to start to get clear on what that purpose is? Maybe one of them is the question you asked yourself about discovering your values. But like, what are some, I don't know, sort of like deep questions someone can ask themselves to start getting a little bit more clear on that purpose?
Yeah. So this is something that we have an exercise we do with people that don't have a purpose or maybe have one, but really wanted to revisit it. I mean, especially, again, I keep on bringing this up, but because the world got 2020 and there is some reckoning, right?
That's good.
And the biggest thing that I say to people that were like, what the hell just happened? It's like, this is time to either define or redefine or revisit your purpose and your values. So on the purpose side, the three questions as a lead into your draft is, number one, what lights you up and like fires you up? And it doesn't have to be a positive fire. It could be like, I'm so pissed off fire.
Yeah.
So just thinking about that, like, there's a lot of things to be pissed off about, right? But then number two is, this is, pretty straightforward, talent. What am I inherently good at? What is it that I'm good at that I don't even know yet? Or that people see in me that I wasn't even sure that I had? So that's the second one. And the third question is basically around impact. And it's not how are you going to change the world impact. It's not that big. It's how you're going to change your world, your immediate world, your ecosystem of who you touch and what's around you, your community. So answering those three questions of light, fire, and in terms of talent and in terms of impact, that's basically your first draft of a statement.
Love
to kind of keep refining as your North Star.
And that's the one page that you need, right? Like,
I think it's a great one page to start from.
Yeah.
And it just gets deeper from there.
Yeah. And I love how you said, over time, like your purpose changes, your purpose evolves. And I think one of the things I've seen in my life, and I'd be curious to see if it's true in yours as well, is that I'll feel that I have like a purpose, something that lights me up, fires me up, that I have some talent in, and I'll push towards it and I'll do it and it'll be great. But then at some point that sort of light, that fire, that thing dies down and it starts to spark up somewhere else. And sometimes it's that the initial thing that I was pulled towards doesn't even really have that big of an impact in my life, but the specific purpose that it served is it introduced me to the next thing.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
You're spot on. Like as a quick example of how I even started thinking about the purpose stuff, the irony of realizing the first moment I had a semblance of a purpose was actually when my dad was dying. And the irony of that was that I was the first, because I was supposed to be pre-med, right? I was studying. And so I had this knowledge that I thought was totally useless because I didn't go down that path. But then when he was sick, and I mean, if you've gone through the healthcare system, it's tough. It's a mess. Yeah. And no offense to people working hard in it, but there's tons of doctors, there's tons of nurses, there's like all this jargon. Yeah. And then I became the translator, the liaison for my dad and my family with the healthcare professionals and teams. And I was like, wow, I'm actually using something within me for a reason. And what better reason was there? I didn't call it purpose yet. Yeah. I was just like, wow, I'm here for a reason. This is the first thing I've been here that I realized I'm here for. And the irony was that it was for my dad and just making sure he could understand what's going on.
Yeah. And
while he's passing.
What a beautiful, a dark time. No way, shape of, or anything around that. But what a beautiful piece that you took from that is opening this part of yourself up that says, that not just says like, oh, I can live something and feel like I really have a purpose, but like living it, right? It's like when you step into a moment where you go, wow, like I really feel like I have a purpose. And once you get a taste of it, it's like you can never not have that sense again. Like a quote I refer to all the time is, it's like when the mind expands, it can no longer contract. And it's like once you realize and you feel and you experience that I can live a purpose, your life is a testament to it, that after that, you didn't settle for anything other than that.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's, well said. You should just finish this interview because you're putting it much more articulately than I am.
Stop it. So if we like move to like the workplace for a little bit, and happiness in the workplace, like let's say, our listener is hanging out with us today and they're going, you know what? This is all great. I'm going to apply this to some of my life as an individual. But there's also the aspect, which is still part of your individual life, but your work life. And maybe our listeners going, I'm not, super happy in my work. Like, what are some of the things they can start to do to increase the amount of happiness they have when it comes to their career?
Yeah. I think the best thing, best next step is to just do these exercises and of the purpose of your values. And if you if we have time, I can share a really quick one in understanding your values.
Please.
Shall we go there?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome.
Let's go.
So, as you can tell already, I believe happiness is not just your highs, it's also your lows, and understanding what both of those mean. So it's really the gamut of it all. So in order to find a deeper sense of our own personal values, we have this exercise, we call it happiness heartbeats, but it's basically you're the protagonist of your own show. And you're reflecting back on all the highs and lows of your life. Let's just pick out 3, top highs, top lows. And this is not just work. I really believe it has to be both work and life.
Okay.
And as you pick out each of those events and you ask yourself, what made that event so high and what made this event so low? And you'll actually start to see patterns of, the why behind those reasons. And so, for example, when, this is my dad, and I was like, oh, okay, people in my life needs to be a priority. Yeah. Climbing Mount Kilimanjaro, I was like, oh, wow, this is ultimate freedom.
Yeah.
Things like that. So seeing that pattern is the way we help people derive their values. So I think a big part of that too is, especially right now, because everyone's doing a big reflection, because some people are really, in a bad, challenging place right now. But when we can actually see for ourselves what we've gone through in the past, we can also see where we went to the next high. And, we can read all of these self-help books. We can read inspirational stories and quotes till kingdom come. Yeah. But what does it actually mean, to you? And when we see ourselves journey through that stuff and actually have the ability to reflect, then those traumas or those losses or those stresses doesn't become traumatic forever. It actually becomes more of a growth. Yeah. And there's a lot of studies being done in the neuroscience space of showing how, trauma will still sit within your body, still sit within your cells. But by doing this sort of practice and reflections, you're able to minimize this long-term impact by acknowledging what these pain points or traumas have been in our life. So that just helps define ourselves better from a happiness standpoint, from a value standpoint, because we're not just chasing all those highs. We also understand why we were so low too.
I love it, man. I think myself, I'm going to go back and listen to this podcast 4 or 5 times over. And I think for our listener, especially in that last piece there where, if you're not happy or you want to be happier, right? Take 5, 10, 30 minutes even, right? Throw some music on and just go through that exercise that you wrote out so beautifully. And I think if you combine that with the other exercise you gave us, right, where you're more so looking at your purpose and asking those 3 questions, man, I think anybody could take both of those and could create a next chapter of their life that's amazing. If they just followed those two things that you laid out so beautifully. So thank you so much for laying those out so beautifully.
So, yeah. Oh, and you can download these too. They're for free from my website. So yeah, I can share that with
and where can they download it? Just throw it out now. Let's get it.
We're gonna do it. Just go to jennlim.com, JENNLIM.com, and there should be a resources section just to download.
I love it. Okay.
Exercises.
And so speaking of the downloads people can get, you've written a recent book, Beyond Happiness. And I'm curious for you, we've talked a lot about happiness today, but what does beyond happiness mean like to you?
It's a nice little segue from our conversation so far. It's essentially realizing that, again, it's not all those highs that we need or seeking or wanting in life that makes us fulfilled. It's actually really embracing the full gamut of those highs and lows that makes it. It's like, for example, the point of our lives, is it to be happy from the time we wake up to the time we go to sleep? I don't it's not even feasible and it's not likely going to happen. But what's more realistic is that from the time we wake up to the time we sleep, at least we know we're living fulfilling lives, if not happy all the time.
Yeah.
So that's why I wanted to go beyond happiness to really, just kind of reframe what do we think about happiness, because it's cliche, but it is really until you really get those lows or, sit in those lows and understand and have a conversation under those lows, you don't really realize how high you can go. So that's really the premise of why I wanted to go beyond, and being able to embrace the chaos and be comfort in the discomfort, which has been plaguing a lot of us in the last few years.
Very true. Yeah. And I again just love how it's easier said than done to go through some of the lows, but you frame it up in a beautiful way that I think, at least as I look at like my own life, and as you're speaking, I'm like thinking of lows in my life. You bring it up in a really beautiful way that makes it feel like there's a good things coming from me going through this hard thing. And I think it makes it a little bit easier to say, okay, I'll look at that thing and like try to extract something from it and use it for my life so that I can live a better life because of that. It's a beautiful way, I think, to go to some of those things when the majority of us in this world, I think, are like, I don't ever want to look at that, think about that, go through that ever again. But it's just so you're great. I love that.
Thanks for going in deep, Stu. This is cool that you. I mean, I feel like you're kind of already getting and living it in some ways because of the way you're reacting. Because I can see your wheels turning.
Yeah, no, I mean, for me, and on this podcast, right? It's like the 3 pillars I mentioned earlier. Is like, how do you live a successful, fulfilling, and a happy life? And you're painting a master class for it. And it's something I try and practice every day in my life. But for me, it's always a constant progression. It's always something I'm continuing to learn, to try to get better at. And so hearing all of these things from you, like I see myself as someone who's happy and fulfilled, but I am going to take all these things you said and like go to the books, get my journal out, break through these things, and just try to elevate my life to the next level. So hearing everything you're saying, wheels are turning, things are spinning in a really good way. So
that's awesome.
Maybe
and you used a really key word. I'm sorry, real quick. You used a real big key word in that is practice. And the fact that you said that, it's like, I know you get it, because it is a practice. It's an everyday practice that you keep on trying and getting better at. At sometimes you fail, but the big thing is, like, I think we get really hard on ourselves when we fail or when we're not getting it. But when you practice with curiosity, then if it doesn't go as planned, it's okay, because it's just a practice. So anyway, I just thought it's really important to remember that part.
I love it, and thank you for pointing that out. And I love the curiosity aspect too, right? You go through with curiosity, you stumble, we could call it, maybe, like, even if you just change the language from fail to stumble, it's like there's a lightness. You go, oh, I stumbled, so what can I learn from it? How can I grow from it? Versus I feel like sometimes the language of fail feels so like visceral, right? Where it's like, I failed. It's like, oh my God, I was stabbed in the chest or the heart or whatever. So I don't know. That's something I'm going to do with my own life. Just change the language of fail to stumble. It's like, because you're not really failing. You're truly stumbling. And if you stumble rather than fail, I mean, you look at a kid that's learning to walk. They stumble, they get back up, they try again, and eventually they start walking. So, cool. I just had a nice little aha. So thank you for that.
You did. I just saw that light bulb.
Yeah. And so one other maybe, deep thing we can look at is, part of going beyond happiness, you bring up this idea of fulfillment, which I love. I just love the idea of fulfillment and making that the target point versus like, oh, let me be super successful or whatever. It's like, if you're fulfilled, success is automatic. So and maybe this is something you've covered, but like, what are some of the ways people can start to make and create a more fulfilling life?
Okay, so where I'm going to go with this is I really, like, it gets construed in all different ways,
Yeah.
but I personally did not believe or think I needed self-love, self-care, self-compassion up until couple years ago. Because I was at the lowest of my lows when I lost my one of my best buds and my co-founder.
Yeah.
And we used to talk about nurturing. We talked about greenhouses, and Tony loved saying, like, we're as leaders, we're here to grow greenhouses, create the conditions so others can grow. And I love that. I totally agreed.
Yeah.
But I've realized that we forgot a big piece, which was, as we're nurturing other greenhouses, we have to tend to our own as well. And that, the whole oxygen mask metaphor in the airplane. But we forgot, maybe because we weren't flying for 3 years. I don't know. We just forgot. So now I think is a good time to remind ourselves that's a big part of fulfillment, is to have that curiosity of, like, what really actually do I need to tend to my greenhouse? And, like, just realizing someone's meditation is different from another person's walk in the park or, a cup of tea or massage, whatever it is, it doesn't matter, but try it and see what it does. And it speaks so much to, now we can finally talk about mental health in the workplace. Now we can talk about things that we knew were under the hood. COVID, everything last few years blew that out. And so now, how can we be real about that? Not just to each other, but to ourselves first. So I think those, with practice and curiosity, that's how we can be truly feeling more fulfilled, because we're not relying on our external sources of needing stimulus or satisfaction. It's like, wow, and I can sit and actually realize this is fulfilling for me and of value for me, then, that's another step away from feeling that loss of our control. Back to the lever, having a more sense of autonomy and freedom because you have it within yourself.
Beautiful. Man, Jenn, this has been such a fun conversation. I've enjoyed this so much.
Me too.
So thank you for being you. Thank you for taking the journey that you've taken in your life. Thank you for sharing it with us. Obviously, if people can find you, as we mentioned, they can go to Jenn Lim with 2 N's, JENNLIM.com. And my last question for you is a question we ask all of our guests, because we want to help people find direction, but do it through action, is, what would you say is one thing our listener can do in the next 24 to 48 hours to start finding direction in their life?
I feel like I named a few things during this talk or this conversation. How about this? Just to add something that's pretty, relatively simple. It's like, do something that you normally would not do. So do something that you would normally say, no, I can't because I don't have time, or no, whatever the no is. Try the beginner's mindset. Pretend you don't know anything at all and see where that goes. And that's, I think, a big part of, like, how I started really realizing how I can nurture my greenhouse and what self-love actually means in positive ways. So beginner's mindset is what I would suggest.
I love it. Awesome. Well, Jenn, thank you again so much for being here. Thank you for being who you are. We're massively grateful. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Stu. Thanks for the deep questions.
Absolutely. Congratulations, my friend, on crushing it through another episode here on Finding Direction. Make sure you give yourself a pat on the back, a round of applause, because you are not willing to settle for less than a life that lights up your soul, and that is absolutely something worth celebrating. I hope you got some nuggets from that conversation with Belinda. More importantly, I hope you take some of those nuggets and start executing on them in your life. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you for being here, and I will talk to you on the podcast soon. Take care, my friend.